It started with the sound of boots grinding into gravel. I was halfway through my morning coffee on the porch when the noise cut through the quiet mountain air. At first, I thought it was hikers passing through, maybe a delivery driver lost on the ridge. But when I looked up from the rim of my mug, I saw them, four bulky guys in matching black polos, each with a crooked patch stitched on the chest. The words read, HOA Security, as if someone had printed them out in bold block letters and slapped them on like a Halloween costume. Behind them, Karen strutted forward in her blazing red suit, heels clacking on the stones, clutching her clipboard like it was a sword. Her sunglasses glinted in the morning light, her lips painted the color of fire, and her expression was exactly what I expected: smug, overconfident, and itching for a fight. "Open the gate," one of the men barked, puffing out his chest like a mall cop who'd finally been given a line in a movie. "This property is under HOA authority." I almost spit my coffee all over the railing. HOA authority out here. I leaned against the porch post, let the steam curl from my mug, and smiled. "Authority on my land," I said calmly. "You've got jokes this early in the morning." Karen snapped her clipboard open, shuffling through a stack of papers like she was presiding over some courtroom trial. "You've built illegally," she screeched. "This cabin violates HOA bylaws. We've had multiple complaints. You are trespassing." The absurdity of it made me chuckle, but behind the humor, heat rose in my chest. This wasn't just a neighbor dropping off a nasty note. This was a convoy. Trucks lined up at the end of my drive like they were staging a raid, and Karen, the self-appointed queen of property values, had decided to crown herself commander of her own private army. What she didn't know was that I had backup of my own, and when it arrived, her clipboard empire was going to crumble faster than she could say noise ordinance. The ridiculous part was, I thought I'd left all this behind. When I bought the cabin, I imagined peace. No more nasty letters about grass length, no more surprise fines for unsightly trash bins, no more HOA Karens measuring my driveway with a tape measure. Just a cabin in the mountains, pine trees stretching for miles, and mornings filled with birdsong and bacon in the pan. Freedom, that's what I bought. Freedom from clipboards, meetings, and bylaws nobody asked for. But apparently, freedom was the one thing Karen couldn't stand. She lived just beyond the bend, in a gaudy McMansion where the forest used to be. Every time I passed her house, she'd glare like a sentry guarding the gates of suburbia. The problem was simple. My cabin wasn't part of her HOA, and that burned her more than a wildfire in July at first. It was petty. Notes under the gate about unpainted fence posts, complaints about chainsaw noise, letters stamped with the HOA logo accusing me of not paying dues I didn't owe. I tossed them in the wood stove, let them curl into smoke, and thought that was the end of it. But Karen wasn't built to quit, and when the letters stopped working, she sent muscle. That morning, the breeze through the open window had been crisp, carrying the smell of pine. My cousins were still asleep in the guest room, both Iksami, both big as oak trees. We'd stayed up late playing cards, drinking whiskey, swapping stories from deployments none of us really liked to talk about. I figured the day would be simple: split some logs, maybe ride into town for supplies. Then came the growl of engines. Not the proud thunder of Harleys, but the uneven sputter of cheap pickup trucks. By the time I stepped onto the porch, mug in hand, they'd already blocked my drive, and Karen was marching toward me like a general who'd just declared war. "You can't just build whatever you want, whenever you want," she shouted, jabbing her clipboard at me through the gate. "The HOA has jurisdiction. My security team has the right to remove you." "Your security team?" I raised an eyebrow. The men shifted awkwardly. Tattoos crawled up their necks. One fiddled with his belt buckle. Another lit a cigarette like he wasn't sure if he was supposed to look tough or just kill time. They didn't look like law enforcement. They looked like extras from a bad action flick. Still, Karen beamed as if she'd brought in the Marines. I set my mug down slowly, careful not to spill. My jaw was tight, but my voice stayed steady. "You're on private land. You don't have a warrant. You don't have authority. The only thing you've got is a clipboard and a case of trespassing." That's when Karen lost it. Her voice shot up 2 octaves, screeching like tires on wet asphalt. "I'll have you evicted. This cabin is an eyesore. My team has orders to remove you now." The men puffed up, rattling the padlock on my gate, trying to look menacing. One growled, "We can do this the easy way or the hard way." Karen's face lit up like she'd won already. She thought I was alone. She thought she could scare me with her half-baked security crew. But what she didn't realize was that inside the cabin, my cousins were waking up, and once they stepped outside, this little show was going to change. I heard the creak of floorboards behind me, the shuffle of boots on wood. The screen door eased open. Jake stepped out first, 6'4", shoulders broad enough to block the sun. His army shirt clung to his frame, tattoos peeking beneath the sleeves. Behind him came Mark, shorter but built like a bulldozer, thick arms crossed over his chest. They didn't say a word at first, just stood there glaring at the so-called officers as if they were raw recruits on day 1 of boot camp. Karen seized her chance. "Good witnesses," she shouted, waving her clipboard. "These men are trespassing. We have orders." Jake tilted his head, studying the mismatched uniforms, the cheap badges, the nervous shifting. Finally, he said, calm as ever, officers, you boys look more like mall cops who lost your ways. Mark let out a low chuckle. But, buddy, I've faced mortar fire overseas. You think I'm scared of your parking ticket squad? The insult landed. The leader bristled, jaw clenching, mirrored shades flashing as he stepped closer. We don't take disrespect lightly. Old man, I shot back, I've chopped logs bigger than you. Karen shrieked again, flipping through her papers like she was about to cite me for breathing too loud. Don't play dumb. This cabin is within our community zone. You're bound by our bylaws. I leaned against the porch rail. Calm as a monk. Karen, the only thing I'm bound by is the deed in my hand, and unless the deer and squirrel signed up for your HOA, you don't have a case. That's when the sound started. Faint, almost imperceptible at first, a low, steady rumble rolling through the valley. The kind of sound you don't just hear, you feel in your bones. The fake security guys paused, glancing over their shoulders. Dust shimmered on the horizon. Karen stiffened, clipboard trembling in her grip. She didn't recognize it yet, but I did. My cousins did too. That was no storm, no passing truck. That was the sound of family. The cavalry was on its way, and Karen's little empire was seconds away from collapse. Jake's grin spread slow across his face. Mark flicked his knife open, idly scraping the blade on the porch rail and me. I picked my coffee back up, let the steam curl around my lips, and smiled. Karen, I said softly, you ever hear a war drum? Because that's what's coming over that ridge. The rumble swelled until the gravel under the gate hummed like a drumskin. The rent-a-cop straightened, then faltered, eyes fixed on the ridge. Dust lifted in a pale curtain between the pines. Chrome winked like sunlight flickering on a river. Karen swallowed and raised the megaphone again, but only a thin squeak came out, the kind of noise a rusty hinge makes when it gives up. She tried to cover it with a cough and a smirk. Ignore it, she said, voice warbling. Probably locals. Not locals, I said, letting myself enjoy it just a little. Family. They came in tight and tidy. Not a sloppy scatter, but a single mind with a dozen engines. The first two Harleys crested the rise shoulder to shoulder, followed by another pair and another, a matched line on spooling like a banner. On their backs, leather vests stitched with unit patches, names ghosted in thread polished by weather and miles. They didn't lurch or wobble or stunt. They just arrived, steady as a tide, and the mountain recognized them. You could feel the air change. The riders fanned across the road in front of the trucks and idled there. Kickstands hit the gravel in clicks and thunks like a percussion section, locking into time. It was beautiful. It was terrifying, at least if you were dressed in a cheap polo and a borrowed badge. One of the so-called officers shifted a cigarette from one corner of his mouth to the other, but his lips trembled so much the ash fell in a little gray snow. The leader took a breath big enough to move his mirrored shades down his nose and then shoved them back up with a thumb. Karen pressed the megaphone to her lips and found her voice. This is an official HOA enforcement action, she shrilled. You are interfering with the riders killed their engines together. The silence hit like the moment between lightning and thunder. Two birds flashed out of a spruce and vanished without a sound. My cousin Danny reached up, unbuckled his helmet, and lifted it off. He didn't look like a headline or a stereotype. He looked like a man carrying a long morning on his shoulders, eyes scanning everything with a soldier's quiet math. He glanced at the trucks, the gate, the clipboard, the megaphone, the patchwork polos, and finally at me. I raised my coffee in a small salute. What's the play? Jake asked, his voice as soft and amused as a creek talking to stones. Depends if they're pretending for money or for love, Danny said. Then he walked to the gate like it was a line on a map. He stopped just on the other side and set his helmet on the post. Ma'am, he said to Karen, I'm going to say this in plain language so nobody confuses anything for anything. This is private land. You don't have authority here. Those men don't have authority here. If you ordered them to cross that fence, you ordered them to break the law. Karen gave a strangled laugh that was more breath than sound. You can't just. This is within the community zone. Which community? Danny said, not unkindly. He tapped the gate with 2 fingers, then pointed down at the gravel. Lines matter. Where I learned to read them. Lines meant the difference between safe and gone. Show me the line on paper or don't talk about it like it's real. The leader of the polos stepped up. Square shoulders, chest caved a little, voice braced to sound important. We're here to keep order, he said. This guy is unauthorized. This guy, I said, lifting the mug, owns the dirt under your boots. Son, Danny said to the leader without heat, what's your licensing agency and bond number? The man blinked. Your guard card, Danny said. Insurance. Unarmed or armed? Who supervises you? What state statute puts you under their scope? Or are you on a Craigslist contract for a presence gig that sounded bigger in the text than it feels in your chest right now? The leader opened his mouth. Nothing chose to come out. Ordered to remove him. Another rider said, voice light as if he were reading a menu. He had a gray streak in his beard and a patch on his vest that said Doc in tiny letters with a date no one was likely to forget. By whom? Show the authority. Show the names. Karen found her megaphone like a lifeline and powered through. Bylaws section. She slapped papers against the plastic horn. Flipping at random like pages could turn into a badge if you smacked them hard enough. We have rights to enforce. You have rules for members, Mark said gently, like he was helping a child with a multiplication table. He's not one, he lives within the spirit of the community, she snapped. The spirit, Jake said dryly, isn't a law. Ma'am, Danny said again. You're warm right now. You're running on feeling. We're going to do you a favor and put this on paper instead. One of the riders, square as a refrigerator and twice as immovable, took a step, reached into a side bag, and brought out a slim black box with a little red eye. He held it up between two fingers. Body cam, he said. He clipped it to his vest, tapped it twice. Beep, beep. You're on. Everyone's on. Say whatever you meant to say. Do whatever you meant to do. The reaction went through the rent-a-cops like a chill. Shoulders dropped. Faces tilted away. Hands found pockets. A man in the second truck coughed and set his phone face down like the glass might put him on trial. Karen tilted the megaphone away from her mouth, then turned it back and tried on a new voice. One she probably used at board meetings when she wanted someone to chair a subcommittee. This isn't necessary, she said. We can handle this informally. You tried informally, I said. With trucks. You blocked a road, Jake added. That's not committee work. That's a charge. Karen slammed the megaphone against her hip. We called the sheriff, she shouted, and that was the first honest thing she'd said all morning. We called him, and he's coming here, and hell, he'll tell you the same thing he told you last time, I said, and I didn't need to raise my voice. Leave him alone. This isn't HOA land. The leader of the Polos pointed his chin at the riders, trying one last time to find the swagger. You think these bikes scare us? Never said scare, Tommy said. Amiable as a Sunday, I said record. Engines turned over again, 12 throats clearing in unison, and the dust rose in rings. It wasn't the roar that broke the rent. It was the shape of the sound, the way it fit the bodies in front of them, the way the men on those machines stood without hurry, without hunger. The leader took half a step back like someone had tugged a string around his waist. The man with the cigarette flicked the butt and missed. It fell into his own boot, and he hopped and cursed and then tried to look like he meant to dance. Karen shoved sunglasses up into her hair and marched to the gate. She jammed the clipboard through the bar so fast it scraped her knuckles and left a little crescent of blood. See this? She shrieked. Noise violations, community ambience, property values. You will be fined. Nobody here's writing you a check, I said. Oh, I know, Karen hissed. You won't have the chance. We'll lean your cabin. We'll freeze your lean, I said. You can't lean air. She made a strangled sound and whirled on her squad. Move, she commanded. Enforce. They moved, all right. Two of them moved backward. Another moved to the driver's door of his truck and then decided it was a good time to check if his license plate screws were tight. The leader stayed put because he felt he owed the word leader the dignity of pretending it meant something. But he'd lost the part of his voice that rings the sheriff's. Tahoe rolled up 10 minutes after everyone's nervous system had already announced a verdict. The sound of his tires was a relief like rain. He parked where the gravel widened and left the engine running. He took his time getting out, which is a kind of message, too. He was a tall man who'd found a kind of grace by not needing it. With a hat that had daylight 2 shades brighter on the brim than on the crown. He saw the riders, saw the trucks, saw the gate, saw the porch, and sighed. Morning, he said to me. Morning, I said back, as if we were sharing a cup of coffee on a dock. He looked at Karen next. Miss Delaney, he said. The way he said her name turned it into something formal and heavy. We spoke last month. You told me to leave him alone then, she said tightly, but this is different. He escalated. He looked at the riders. Tommy's body cam blinked a polite ruby eye. The sheriff tipped his chin to it. You recording, Tom? Yup, Tommy said. We're rolling. The sheriff nodded. Good. I like tapes. He turned to the leader of the rent. What are you carrying today, son, sir? The man said, bewildered. Licenses, the sheriff said. Insurance. Patrol contract. Agency. Show me your paperwork. The man glanced at Karen like she kept authority in her handbag. Karen dug furiously through a folder and brought up a printout with a logo that looked designed by someone who only half believed fonts could have feelings. The sheriff looked at it for 5 seconds and gave it back. Ma'am, this isn't a license, he said. It's a brochure. It's our security, she said, every word a nail driven into the plank of her certainty. No, he said gently. It isn't. He turned and pointed at the trucks. Move those, please, right now. You're blocking access. That's not a gray area. The leader did move then, gratitude whipping his feet into motion. He muttered orders and the truck sighed and reversed and pulled away from the gate like reluctant dogs leaving a kitchen. The sheriff watched them settle at the bend, then took off his hat and held it between his hands. Ms. Delaney, he said, your HOA doesn't extend to this parcel. It never did. We discussed it. You came out here with unlicensed security personnel, blocked egress, and threatened to remove a property owner from his land without authority. I have by, she began, and he lifted a palm. It wasn't aggressive. It was just the kind of motion that catches a falling glass before it shatters. You have bylaws for members, he said. He's not a member. He should be, she said helplessly. the world shrinking in her eyes to a place where should was a country worth invading. He lives in our community. He uses our roads. He uses county roads, the sheriff said, and he uses his driveway. The HOA's jurisdiction is where its plat maps say it is. He glanced at me. You bring me the deed again. I nodded and lifted the folder from the porch table. I'd set it there when I heard the trucks, not because I was nervous, because I like clean lines. I walked it to the gate, slid it through, and the sheriff opened it and looked at the same pages he'd looked at last month and the month before that, when Karen called him out to inspect my mailbox as a potential threat to democracy. He nodded, closed the folder and slid it back. Ma'am, he said to Karen, I'm asking you to leave. Don't come back without a court order. If you return with unlicensed enforcement or you block access again, I won't ask next time. She stood there with the megaphone hanging, the clipboard heavy enough to fishtail in her hand. She worked her jaw as if she could chew reality into a shape she liked. Then she tried a new strategy. She turned to me and showed me all her teeth. It wasn't a smile. It was a gate of bone. You think you won, she said softly, so softly the mic on Tommy's chest barely caught it. You think your little biker club scared me. I have time. I have patience. I have friends. Get better ones, Jake said. She flinched, then covered it with a laugh that sounded like a glass breaking in the next room. Fine, she sang to no one in particular. Fine, we'll do this the right way. She stalked to her SUV, threw her megaphone into the back seat so hard it bounced off something metallic, and gunned it. Dust curled around her tires. The rent-a-cops followed. The sheriff waited until they'd disappeared around the bend, then put his hat back on and exhaled through his nose like a tired horse who'd forgiven the world but only on credit. Gents, he said to the riders. As always, Sheriff, they said, respectful without being sentimental. Keep it on the civilized side. He said to me. I framed the last fine. I said, civil enough. He tried not to smile and failed a little. I saw the photo. When he left, the mountain did the thing it does when a storm decides it was only practicing. The light evened. The birds thawed. The riders let their shoulders fall a few millimeters. A shift so small only family would notice. Danny reached out and squeezed my forearm with 2 fingers. Not much more than a tap. You did good, he said. You didn't bite. Let her buck. I'm learning, I said. What ate late that day? Neighbors drifted by with casseroles and jokes. Somebody brought a cherry pie and pretended it was a citation. Somebody else gave me a tin sign that said nitrogen oxide Karen zone and laughed too hard at his own joke. I tacked the $4,750 noise pollution notice above the hearth with 2 brass thumbtacks. It looked handsome there the way a buck's rack looks handsome. Proof not of murder but of patience. You might think that's where it ended. You'd be wrong. Karen never leaves a stage when there's still light. 2 evenings later, my trail cam blinked and caught the familiar grill of her SUV easing past the gate, lingering, then easing on. She didn't roll the window down. She didn't shout. She just looked, eyes heavy under the rim of her visor, and then she went home to sit at a kitchen island big enough to land a drone on. And she plotted what she did next was not trucks. It was paper. The envelope wore the HOA's logo like a new badge, waxy and confident. Inside, a letterhead I recognized from other times the world tried to make itself bigger than my land. The words were bland and legal and heavy with the math of fines. Community disruption fee, it said this time. Repetitive noise engine events, it said, and my cousins almost inhaled their tongues laughing. Jake slapped it on the table. Frame it, he said. Right under the first but tucked behind the nonsense was another page. Its title was bold and slightly tilted, as if it had been pulled from a template with a sweat-slick hand. Notice of annexation proceedings, it said. Proposed boundary adjustment, public comment period, and then the part they meant me to choke on. The board intends to adopt amended plat maps to bring abutting parcels within the HOA for uniform enforcement. A hearing will be held at Danny. Read it twice. They're going to try to vote reality into your yard, he said. Can they? I asked, though I knew the answer and so did he. Not legally, he said. But legally isn't their instrument. Pressure is. That night I pulled my own version of muscle, not Engine's files. I called my niece, Emily, who once made a county clerk cry with kindness and PDFs, and my friend Doug, a civil engineer who keeps plat maps in his head the way most people keep birthdays. In a day, we had a packet, the original recorded plat with the HOA's footprint in black and white, the deed chain on my parcel like a clean river list, the county's guidance on voluntary annexations, and the bright red line where consent begins and ends. Emily added a cheery cover memo with bullet points that smiled while they showed teeth. Doug added an overlay that would make a judge nod before the coffee cooled. We showed up to the hearing with our papers in a cheap plastic file box and set it beside Karen's stack of glossy trifold brochures. The room was vanilla and fluorescent and buzzing with that civic hum you only notice when you realize civilization is a miracle. Neighbors filled the back chairs. 2 of the rent-a-cops in tamed polos and fresh haircuts pretended to be bored near a fire. The board sat behind a table draped in a cloth that didn't quite reach the floor. Their name placards tented in front of them like little roofs over little houses. Karen wore blue this time, a courtroom color. and she smiled as if we were here for cupcakes. "We appreciate community engagement," she said into the mic, which gave her voice an accidental quaver that made her sound honest. "Our goal is uniformity, fairness, safety." "Safety," someone in the back muttered, and half the room smiled without moving their mouths. Emily waited her turn and then stood. She is not tall, but she is commanding in the way tides are commanding. She slid our packet across to the board members as if she were returning borrowed tools in better condition than she found them. "This won't take long," she said pleasantly, and it didn't. She walked them through the plat they already knew and the code they'd skimmed and the part where consent is not a vibe. She quoted the exact line where annexation is described as voluntary and with the explicit written agreement of affected property owners. She was never unkind. She was devastating. Karen tried to interrupt. Emily paused with a librarian's patience and waited for the chair's little gavel to kiss the table. Then she continued. 3 minutes before it was over and 5 dots to chair. An older man who once sold real estate like it was the last clean water on earth cleared his throat and arranged his pens. "Thank you," he said. "We will consider the information." He looked at Karen. "We will consider all of the information." Karen smiled her teeth again. "Of course," she said, brittle and sweet. "Of course." We left with relief sitting cool on the napes of our necks. That night, the trail cam caught her SUV again, idling then moving on. The letter that arrived next didn't have the logo. It came in a plain white envelope with the return address of the HOA's insurer, a company whose ads showed dogs and porches and the kind of sunsets that make you think paperwork and love can be friends. It did not carry a sunset inside. It said, in the cleanest language money could print, that claims arising from intentional acts, including but not limited to impersonation, malicious prosecution, extortionate threats, and unlawful restraint, are excluded from coverage. It mentioned, without flourish, that use of unlicensed security personnel may void defense obligations. It asked for a full accounting of recent events involving the association's representatives. I set the letter down. I looked at the ceiling and listened to the cabin breathe. Then I laughed. It wasn't a big laugh. It was a small, grateful sound, like a gate swinging shut and clicking true. 2 days later, a neighbor I barely knew, a woman with a sharp haircut and eyes like the edge of a winter morning, knocked at my door. "I'm sorry to bother you," she said, and I believed her. "I'm the treasurer." I poured coffee. She didn't drink it. She held her cup like a prop and looked at the fire and then at her shoes and then at me. "I didn't know about the security," she said. "I knew we were trying to engage you." Karen's word. "I didn't know about trucks. I didn't approve any payments for any services." She used a discretionary line for landscaping That's what the memo said. She blinked a few times and folded a paper towel in half and then in half again. "They asked me to sign a letter to the insurer. I wouldn't." She shook her head. "My husband says I should quit. I think I will." "Thank you," I said. I meant it. She put a thumb drive on the mantel and left. It was very small, the kind of thing a bird might steal and build into a nest. On it, emails, meeting whispers, Karen's edits on drafts, line breaks where she wanted the language to punch, bold in places that made the syllables act like knuckles, an invoice from a company with a name like a sneeze, for presence and persuasion services rendered on a certain morning, and, oh dear God, an audiophile.gug came over with his laptop. We listened. The first minute was scratchy phone air. Then Karen, unmistakable, telling a man that the HOA needed real enforcement energy, that uniform presence equals compliance, that the sheriff is in our pocket, a line even she couldn't quite swallow without coughing. She told him what to wear. She told him what to say. She told him, twice, to rattle the lock. "You know," Doug said thoughtfully, tapping a key to rewind the bit about rattle, "locks are like witnesses. They don't perform on command unless someone shakes them first." I didn't post the audio. I did something quieter. I sent it, along with the emails and the invoice and the insurer's letter and Emily's neat outline and a 1-page summary written in plain English, to the board's chair. I did not copy Karen. I did not copy anyone else. I put the thumb drive back on the mantel like a little bright fish. A week passed with the kind of silence that comes from withheld breath. Then a notice went up on the HOA's website. It was small and gray and smelled like surrender. The annexation hearing would not proceed at this time. The board had voted to commence an internal governance review. The treasurer's name had vanished from the officer's page. So had Karen's vice. The chair's name remained, looking lonelier. The town's little paper ran a piece 3 days later. HOA faces questions over security, annexation. The article was mild, even polite, but it included one quote from an unnamed law enforcement source about unlicensed personnel, potential restraint, and false claims of authority. It didn't say my name. It didn't say Karen's. It didn't need to. You might think that was the end. It wasn't. One morning I found fresh tire prints near my lower fence where the road bends and lifts its shoulder to look around the hill. At noon, a bouquet arrived at the cabin. Pink lilies that made the place smell like a kindly funeral. No card. At dusk, a drone whined somewhere above the trees and then jerked off toward the west. Jake pulled a face. "She's a stubborn one," he said. "Stubborn is a kind word." Mark said. I have other words. I didn't want to play whack-a-mole with new tricks. That night, at the kitchen table, with Doug on speaker and Emily on video, we wrote a different kind of letter. It wasn't a threat or a boast. It was a petition, a request for a protective order enjoining the HOA and its agents from any action designed to harass, intimidate, or impede access, and requiring notice and consent for any recording on or over the property. We attached a map and the audio transcript and a short affidavit about the trucks. We were not dramatic. We were thorough. The hearing for the petition took place in a courtroom that looked like a chapel forgot why it had pews. The judge was a woman who had worn her patience to a fine shine. She listened to Emily, to me, to the sheriff, to the HOA chair. She listened stone still to the audio as it played through a tinny speaker. If her mouth tightened at all, it was in the half-second where Karen coughed after saying the word pocket. Then she looked at Karen for the first time and said, "Miss Delaney, do you want to be heard?" Karen stood with her lawyer at her elbow. Her lawyer tried to stand for her. The judge lifted a single eyebrow, and the lawyer sat. Karen took a breath and reached for the place inside herself where her certainty lives. "I acted in good faith," she said. "I acted for the community. He is not a good neighbor. He turned this into a circus." The judge, held up her palm. "You rattled his lock." Silence is heavy in rooms like that. It has weight. The judge wrote for a while in the kind of long looping hand that looks like it should smell faintly of a garden. Then she spoke without looking up. "The petition is granted. For 1 year from today. The association and Ms. Delaney are enjoined from entering the petitioner's land without the petitioner's express, written consent or a warrant. The association shall not purport to regulate or enforce any rule on the petitioner's property. The association will remove any signage implying authority over the petitioner's land within 72 hours. Costs to the petitioner." She tapped the paper with the pen. "I suggest a year of quiet." Karen's lawyer opened his mouth and then closed it. Karen made a sound like cloth tearing. The judge looked up. "Ms. Delaney," she said, very calmly. "There are people who believe process makes them powerful. It doesn't. It makes them accountable. Learn it." We left without shaking anyone's hand. Outside, the sun had done something holy to the courthouse steps. Danny, who'd brought his bike but not his vest, leaned against the railing and grinned at the sky like it had told him a joke. "You sure you don't want to move back to town?" he said to me. "I like my porch." I said, "I like my coffee." "You like your trophies," he said, nodding. "You're going to frame the order right next to the fine," I said. The twist came a week later. A phone call I almost didn't answer because I didn't recognize the number. The voice on the other end introduced itself as a man whose job title sounded like it had too many syllables to be useful. He was with the bank that serviced the HOA's reserve accounts. He had read the paper. He had read the order. He had read a letter from the insurer that had arrived on his desk like a pigeoned note carrying fire. "We're reviewing exposures," he said politely. "There are covenants in our covenants." He laughed softly, embarrassed to be amused by his own language. "If the coverage is compromised and the board acted outside its scope, our security interest becomes rubbery. We prefer stone." He asked me 2 questions I did not expect. First, whether I had any interest in a mediated resolution. Second, whether I knew that the HOA had borrowed against future dues to renovate the clubhouse 2 years ago and might be approaching a covenant breach if dues collections dipped because of a reputation event. I did not know. He did not need me to. He thanked me for my time like we had discussed the weather and hung up. 2 days later, the chair and the treasurer, who had not quit after all but had returned like someone who decided the right thing tastes better than the easy thing, came to my porch. They did not ask me to join the HOA. They did not ask me to compromise my land. They asked, simply, and with a humility I believed, for help. Not to save them. To save the people who had nothing to do with any of this. "There are old women on fixed incomes on those streets," the treasurer said. "There are young families trying to pay for braces. There are men who worked double shifts and don't know how to read a line item and shouldn't have to. We can clean house," the chair said. He looked older than his photo on the website. "We can pay for what we did. We can change bylaws so this doesn't happen twice. But if it all burns at once, it hurts the wrong backs." I listened. I felt the weight of it. Then I told them yes. Not because I owed them, because I owed the mountain the piece that drew me to it. I told them I would not sue the HOA for damages, only for my costs, and only if they failed to do what they promised. I told them I would not leak the audio as long as they removed Karen from anything that had letters in it. I told them I would, if it helped, speak at a meeting and say that we found a line and respected it. "You don't have to like me," I said. "You have to like laws. You have to like neighbors." They did what they said. In a month, the bylaws that had been a cudgel turned into something like a fence useful, if you don't try to put it in the river. The treasurer posted a full accounting that made me whistle, not because it was evil, but because it was sloppy, and sloppiness is a cousin of cruelty. The insurer came back with language that was both kind and unambiguous. The bank smiled in the way banks do when risk stops rattling the windows. And Karen, she did not come to the meeting where her chair was empty. She didn't call or email. She moved, not to a far place, just to another bend in the road, another house big enough to give the illusion of scale. Sometimes I see her SUV slide by the trail cam like a fish at the edge of a net. She no longer slows. She learned a thing, just not the thing she meant to. The unexpected part, at least to me, wasn't that she lost. It was that we didn't choose to make her loss our victory party. The riders stopped by one more time and stacked kindling under my porch in the neatest little pyramids you've ever seen. Jake and Mark sanded the top rail where the knife had left soft scars. Emily painted the mailbox a stupid, cheerful yellow. The sheriff waved once from his Tahoe and didn't say a word. I made coffee and brought out extra mugs. One last letter arrived, weeks later, with a stamp so ordinary it felt like a joke. It was from a kid at the end of the street who rides a bike with a bell and thinks pine cones are currency. He drew my cabin in green marker and put my bike in front of it, even though I don't own one. He printed his letters wide as sky. "Thank you for not moving," it said. I didn't frame it. I put it on the fridge with a magnet shaped like a trout. Sometimes I sit on the porch, when the light goes the color of a copper penny, and think about lines. The ones on maps, the ones on paper, the ones we draw in ourselves. People like Karen believe they can redraw the world by force or by font. They can't. The best they can do is shake the lock. It rattles, it holds. If you're lucky, you've got family. If you're blessed, you've got a deed as clean as morning. And if you're both, you've got a life no clipboard can puncture. The valley is quiet again. The birds are back to their gossip. Sometimes there's a low far hum like thunder, and I smile, because I know it's just Danny and Tommy and the boys on a Sunday somewhere, riding through a different story that will never be told because nobody needed to rattle a gate that day. If you've ever had a Karen of your own, you don't need my advice. You already know it. Stand steady. Keep your paperwork tidy and your temper cooler than your coffee. Let them perform. Let them shatter themselves against the line. And when it's over, don't dance on the wreckage. Build a better fence. Invite the neighbors. Teach the kids where the boundary is and why it matters. Drop your story in the comments. Tell me the line you held and the day it held you back. And if you're watching this from a porch with a mug in your hand, tell me what time it is where you are. I'll raise mine to yours. We'll make a toast quiet, solid, and unexpected to the kind of victory that looks like nothing at all from a distance. A road a gate unshaken. A morning that stays a morning all the way through. 2 weeks passed, and for the first time in months, the valley felt normal again. The mornings were crisp. The creek ran clear, and the only sounds were birds and the occasional crack of an axe splitting wood. But peace, I've learned, is fragile when someone like Karen is nursing a grudge. She may have lost her security team and her annexation stunt, but she wasn't done. She couldn't be done. For people like her, power isn't a tool, it's oxygen. Take it away, and they choked out. It started subtle. A drone buzzed over the tree line one evening, the kind of cheap quadcopter you can pick up at a mall kiosk. I caught the shimmer of its plastic wings against the sunset and heard the whining blades. It hovered too long above my chimney before veering off, wobbling like a mosquito drunk on blood. The next day a neighbor stopped by with his phone. He'd gotten a flyer in his mailbox, anonymous. No signature, but the tone was unmistakable. Dangerous activity in the mountains, it read. Noise. Trespassing. Veterans with violent tendencies. My name wasn't on it, but the implication might as well have been branded in red. Karen had found a new weapon. Rumor. The third strike came in the form of a letter. Not from Karen this time, not even from the HOA directly. It was stamped with county stationery, the kind that makes your stomach tighten before you even tear the flap. A notice of inspection, it said. A complaint had been filed. Unsafe wood stove, illegal smoke emissions, potential fire hazard. Someone had told the county I was burning trash inside my cabin. I laughed when I read it. Then I got angry, because I knew exactly who had made the call. And I also knew the only thing I burned in that stove was pine oak, and occasionally Karen's letters. The inspector arrived 3 days later, a lean man with a gray beard and a clipboard that actually meant something. He walked through my cabin, sniffed the air, peered up the chimney, and nodded. Clean as a whistle, he said. He scribbled a note, signed his name, and smiled. Sorry to waste your time. What happens more often than you'd think. I wasn't surprised. Karen's war had shifted from bold invasions to shadowy jabs. She was trying to bleed me dry with paperwork, hoping if she couldn't scare me with trucks and megaphones, she could bury me under complaints and rumors. But here's the thing. I had patience. More importantly, I had people. And people always beat paperwork when the truth is on their side. The neighbors were the first to turn. The footage of her security squad retreating had circulated quietly on phones and in living rooms. Every time Karen walked into the grocery store or the gas station, she was met with smirks, mutters, and the kind of polite silence that cuts deeper than insults. Folks who'd been too scared to speak before suddenly found their courage. They stopped by my cabin, offering small gestures, a bundle of kindling, a jar of jam, a handshake with eyes that lingered a second too long. One man said it outright. You gave us permission to laugh at her. That laughter spread faster than any rumor Karen could print. Then came the night of the town meeting. Normally I wouldn't have bothered. Those things are endless cycles of pothole complaints and zoning debates. But word had spread. Karen was going to make a scene. She couldn't resist the stage. And I knew if she had her way, She'd twist the narrative until somehow I was the villain. The community hall was packed. Folding chairs scraped against linoleum, kids whispered in the back, and the air smelled faintly of burnt coffee from the urn in the corner. I sat 3 rows in, flanked by Jake and Mark, who looked like they'd been carved from granite. Karen sat at the front, blue suit pressed, hair lacquered, her clipboard stacked high. When her turn came, she stood, adjusted the mic, and plastered on a smile. "We all know what's been happening," she began, her voice syrupy. "We've endured intimidation, noise, and reckless behavior that puts our property values and our families at risk." She glanced in my direction, subtle enough to give her self-deniability, but everyone followed her gaze. "This is not about one man," she lied. "This is about community standards." She launched into her performance, stories of sleepless nights, children frightened by motorcycle engines, the supposed dangers of veterans who didn't leave the war behind. Each sentence was designed to smear, to drip poison into ears that might not know better. But the thing about lies is, they sound hollow when the truth has already been seen with your own eyes. When she finished, the room was quiet. Not supportive quiet, not moved quiet, the kind of quiet that waits for someone to stand up and break the spell. I rose slowly, the wooden chair groaning as if it shared my patience. Every face turned to me. Karen's smirk flickered. I didn't shout. I didn't match her hysteria. I spoke like I was still on my porch, coffee in hand, voice calm as stone. "What Karen won't tell you," I began, "is that she sent unlicensed men onto my property. She ordered them to rattle my lock. She claimed authority. She didn't have authority. This county has already said she never had. When that failed, she called the sheriff. When that failed, she filed complaints. And when those failed, she tried to change the map itself. Not for safety, not for fairness, for control." I reached into my jacket and pulled out a folded page. The room leaned forward. "This," I said, holding it up, "is the letter from the HOA's insurer. The one that says intentional acts, impersonation, and extortion aren't covered. The one that says their board may be personally liable for what happens when they cross the line." I let the silence stretch until people shifted in their chairs. "Ask yourselves, is this the kind of leadership you want speaking for you?" Karen sputtered, trying to cut in, but the chair rapped his gavel weakly. The crowd murmured, and then the unexpected twist. The treasurer stood up, the same woman who had left a thumb drive on my mantle weeks earlier. She raised a hand, eye steady. "I can confirm what he's saying," she said. "The payments for those so-called security men came out of a landscaping budget line." Karen signed off on it herself. I refused to backdate the ledger. She hesitated, then added, "I have the emails." The room erupted. Murmurs turned to gasps, gasps to angry voices to shouts. Karen slammed her clipboard on the table and screeched about loyalty, about betrayal, about vendettas, but her words were drowned out by the sound of neighbors who had finally had enough. The board members exchanged nervous glances. One of them stood and whispered to another. By the time the gavel fell again, the decision was clear. An emergency vote had been called. Karen's position was hanging by a thread, and everyone in that room could see it. That night, as the meeting spilled into the parking lot under buzzing sodium lights, people gathered around me, shaking hands, clapping shoulders. Someone joked about making the Harley riders honorary neighborhood watch. Someone else said they wanted to see the infamous fine framed above my fireplace. For the first time, Karen was the one being whispered about in the shadows, not me. But I didn't celebrate. Not yet, because I knew Karen, and I knew that when cornered, she didn't surrender. She struck back harder. And sure enough, 2 mornings later, another envelope showed up in my mailbox. This one wasn't a fine. It wasn't a complaint. It wasn't even from the HOA. It was a summons. Karen had filed a civil lawsuit against me personally, accusing me of defamation, harassment, and inciting a mob against her authority. I laughed when I read it, but only for a moment, because lawsuits, even baseless ones, have weight. They eat time, money, and peace of mind. And that was the moment I realized the real battle hadn't been the trucks or the Harleys or the megaphones. The real battle was just beginning. And Karen had decided to fight it on paper, and this time, I was going to beat her not with vengeance or laughter, but with receipts sharp enough to cut her entire empire to pieces. The courthouse smelled of old paper and polish. The kind of smell that tells you truth lives here, but only if you drag it in by the collar. I sat at the defense table, my cousins a few rows behind me, arms crossed like human granite. Across the aisle, Karen perched at the plaintiff's table. Blue suit, sharp lipstick, perfect, eyes gleaming like she'd already won. Beside her sat a lawyer I didn't recognize. A young man in an expensive tie who looked like he'd been promised an easy win and a headline. Karen wouldn't stop smiling. It wasn't joy, it was hunger. She believed this was her redemption arc, the chance to flip the script and paint herself as the victim. After all, paper had weight. A summons could terrify more than a clipboard ever could. But the thing about paper is, it cuts both ways. And I'd come armed with more than coffee this time. I had receipts. The judge Enterad's turned deliberate, no patience for theater. The clerk called the case, Delaney versus Carter. My name echoed through the room, but I didn't flinch. Karen leaned forward like a cat ready to pounce. Her lawyer started with fire. He painted me as a menace, a homeowner who defied community rules, who incited bikers to terrorize law-abiding citizens, who mocked authority and orchestrated a mob. He gestured so wildly his tie flipped over his shoulder, but he didn't notice. He spoke of trauma, of fear, of neighbors living in constant dread. Karen dabbed theatrically at her eyes with a tissue she hadn't used before. It was a performance polished for sympathy. Then it was my turn. My lawyer, an older man named Whitaker, who had seen more HOA cases than anyone should in one lifetime, stood calm, his voice steady as stone. "Your Honor," he began, "this case is not about trauma or fear. It's about a woman who mistook power for law. And we have proof." He clicked a button on the laptop. The first video appeared on the screen mounted above the jury box. Grainy trail cam footage, but clear enough. 3 trucks blocking my gate. Men in black polos rattling my lock. Karen at the center waving her clipboard like a queen commanding toy soldiers. Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Karen's smile twitched. The second clip rolled, body cam footage from Tommy the rider. Karen's voice rang out through the speakers, shrill and certain. "My security team has authority here. Rattle the lock. Remove him." The words bounced off the courtroom walls. Undeniable. Immortalized. The lawyer's pen froze in his hand. The judge's eyebrow arched. Karen shot to her feet. "This is taken out of context," she screamed. "They provoked me." "Sit down, Ms. Delaney," the judge snapped. She sat. Her cheeks flushed crimson. Whitaker wasn't done. He produced the thumb drive. "Emails, Your Honor," he said, "from the HOA treasurer's account, showing payments for presence and persuasion drawn from a landscaping fund, showing Ms. Delaney authorizing disbursements to unlicensed security personnel." And here he clicked again. The audio played. Karen's voice filled the room. "The sheriff is in our pocket." She coughed, then barked. "Uniform presence equals compliance. Rattle the lock. Make him scared." The silence that followed was nuclear. Even the jury shifted in their seats, some with mouths slightly open. My cousins behind me stifled their laughter. Karen's lawyer stood, red-faced, stammering. This is inadmissible. It's admissible." The judge cut in, "And it's damning." Karen's tissue fell to the table. She reached for her clipboard like it could shield her, flipping through blank pages as if somewhere, somehow, she could find the words to rewrite reality. But no words came. Then came the unexpected blow. The treasurer herself took the stand. She looked small, nervous, but her voice carried weight. She confirmed the invoices. She confirmed the misuse of funds. She confirmed the late-night meetings where Karen insisted on teaching the mountain man a lesson. And when Whitaker asked why she was here, she said simply, "Because the truth matters more than loyalty." Karen erupted. "Traitor," she screeched, pointing a shaking finger. "You were always jealous, always weak enough." The judge barked, gavel cracking like thunder. "One more outburst and you will be held in contempt." The final nail was the insurer's letter. Whitaker held it up like a holy text. "Your Honor, this letter makes clear the HOA's insurance excludes intentional acts, which means any damages fall not on the association as a whole, but on the individual board members who authorized them." He let the words hang, heavy as stone. "That means Ms. Delaney." Karen's eyes widened. For the first time, her smile was gone. The judge leaned back, steepled her fingers, and delivered the blow. "This court finds the plaintiff's claims baseless. The evidence demonstrates a clear abuse of authority, intentional harassment, and misuse of HOA funds. Therefore, the case is dismissed with prejudice. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the county prosecutor for review of possible criminal charges related to impersonation of security officers and misappropriation of funds." The gavel came down. Bang. Courtroom erupted not in cheers, but in a low, buzzing hum. Karen collapsed back into a chair, white-knuckled eyes darting like a trapped animal. Her lawyer whispered frantically, but she shoved him away. She grabbed her clipboard, clutching it against her chest like a lifeline, though everyone in that room now knew it was just paper. I stood, calm, collected, coffee cup steady in my hand, even though there was no coffee in it. I turned to her, lowered my voice so only she and the nearest few could hear. "You wanted authority, Karen. What you got was accountability." Her jaw worked, but no sound came out. Outside, reporters waited, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. I didn't stop. I didn't gloat. I just said one line. "Paperwork beats lies." Then I walked into the sunlight, my cousins at my side, neighbors clapping my back. Behind me, Karen's world wasn't just cracked. It was collapsing. But even then, I knew, for someone like Karen, losing in court wasn't the end. It was just another wound. And wounded animals don't disappear. They lash out. The only question was how and when to try again. For a while, it seemed like Karen had been broken. After the courtroom humiliation, she stopped showing her face at board meetings. The HOA's website scrubbed her name from the officer list. Neighbors whispered that she was moving, that she was finished, that finally the mountain would be quiet. But I knew better. Karen's pride was deeper than the valley itself, and broken pride doesn't vanish, it festers. The first sign came late one night. A truck idled at the end of my drive, headlights off, engine rumbling low. My trail cam caught the outline of Karen's SUV pulled alongside. 2 men in hoodies leaned against the truck bed, whispering, pointing at the gate. They didn't come closer, not that night, but it was enough to remind me Karen wasn't done. A week later, I found my mailbox smashed flat, metal twisted like it had been hit with a bat. On the crushed lid, someone had spray-painted 3 words in jagged red. "This isn't over. My cousins found it before I did and were already standing guard on the porch when I walked out with my coffee." Jake shook his head, calm but grim. "She's unraveling," 'cause Mark spat into the gravel. "We've fought wars overseas. This is child's play, but it's still dangerous." That night I heard the whine of a drone again. This time, it wasn't a cheap toy. This one had a camera that glinted in the moonlight, hovering just long enough to make its presence known. It circled the cabin once, twice, then zipped away into the dark. I didn't chase it. I didn't need to, because I already had something better than intimidation. I had receipts and allies who knew how to use them. The next morning, I called Emily, my niece, the civil clerk with a knack for documents. She filed a police report with photos of the graffiti, the smashed mailbox, and the trail cam stills of Karen's SUV lurking in the dark. Then Doug, my engineer friend, installed a new camera system, this one with motion-activated floodlights bright enough to turn midnight into noon. If Karen wanted to play shadow games, she was about to find out the shadows belonged to me. But Karen didn't stop. She escalated. 2 days later, county officials arrived at my cabin again. This time they carried a stop work order, citing a complaint that I was building an illegal extension on the cabin. When I asked who filed it, one officer just shrugged. Anonymous tip. I led them inside, showed them every corner of the cabin. No construction, no new beams, nothing but the same logs and stone chimney that had stood for decades. They sighed, scribbled notes, and left. It was then I realized Karen's new strategy: death by 1,000 cuts. If she couldn't win in court, if she couldn't scare me with trucks or megaphones, she'd bury me under complaint after complaint until I cracked. But here's what she didn't know. Every one of her moves was building my case, not hers. Every false complaint, every midnight stunt, every whisper campaign was another nail in her coffin. The breaking point came at the next HOA community meeting. Karen wasn't even on the board anymore, but she stormed in anyway, red suit blazing, clipboard in hand, eyes wild. The room froze as she marched to the front, slamming her papers onto the table. "This man is a menace," she screeched, pointing directly at me. "He's destroying our neighborhood. He intimidates. He has biker gangs patrolling our roads." The board chair tried to calm her, but she shoved past him, seizing the mic. "If the HOA won't act, I will," she shrilled. "This entire valley will pay the price for letting him defy me." That's when the unexpected happened. One by one, neighbors pulled out their phones. Not to record, they already had recordings. They started playing them out loud. The trail cam footage of her SUV at midnight, the smashed mailbox, the drone hovering, her ranting into the megaphone, her voice on the audio file ordering men to rattle my lock. The room filled with her own words, echoing off the walls, overlapping, chaotic, an avalanche of proof. Karen's face strained white. She tried to shout over it, waving her clipboard like a drowning swimmer clings to driftwood, but her voice was swallowed by the chorus of her own lies. Finally, the sheriff himself stood at the back of the room. He hadn't come for a meeting. He'd come for Karen. He stepped forward, hat low, papers in hand. "Ms. Delaney," he said evenly, "you're under arrest for criminal harassment, filing false reports, and misuse of funds." The gasp that followed was almost a cheer. Karen stumbled back, clutching her clipboard so tightly it bent in half. "No, you can't. This is my community. I built this." "No," the sheriff said, slipping the cuffs onto her wrists. "You tried to own what was never yours. There's a difference." The neighbors erupted, not in anger but in relief. Phones captured every second as Karen was led out, red suit crumpled, clipboard dangling useless from her fingers. For years she'd ruled with fear and fines. Now she was just another name in a booking log. Back at the cabin that night, my cousins and I sat on the porch, whiskey glasses in hand, the fire from the hearth glowing through the window. Jake raised his glass. "To family," he said. Mark raised his. "2 receipts." I lifted mine last, "and to never letting a Karen tell you how to live." We clinked, and the sound rang clear against the mountain air. The unexpected part came weeks later. A neighbor's kid rode his bike up my drive, clutching a crumpled flyer. "They're disbanding the HOA," he said breathlessly. "The county's dissolving it. No more meetings. No more fines." I unfolded the flyer. It was true. The HOA was gone. The board had voted themselves out of existence. Their insurance pulled. Their accounts frozen. Their authority dismantled brick by brick. Karen had set out to expand her empire. Instead, she destroyed it. Now the valley is quiet again. No drones, no trucks, no fake security. Just the sound of the creek, the birds, and sometimes the roar of Harleys when family comes to visit. The fine for noise pollution still hangs above my fireplace, framed like a trophy. But beside it now hangs something even sweeter, the official dissolution order of the HOA, signed and stamped in ink. 2 pieces of paper, 2 victories, 1 against lies, 1 for freedom. And if you're watching this, maybe you've had your own Karen, maybe you've fought your own battle against fake authority. Remember this, you don't need to shout louder than them, you just need to stand longer. Paperwork beats lies, family beats fear, and in the end, truth is louder than any clipboard could ever be. So drop your story in the comments, tell me how you stood your ground, and if you're watching this from your porch with coffee in your hand, tell me where you are and what time it is. I'll raise my mug to you, because freedom tastes best when it's shared.